I am a second-year MBA student here at the Carlson School of Management. I have the distinguished pleasure, honor, and privilege today to be moderating this session that I'm super excited about, and I know our distinguished panelist is as well. So, what are we all here for today? Today, as most of you are aware of, is Give to the Max Day. Now, Give to the Max Day is Minnesota's answer to Giving Tuesday, which is one of the biggest fundraising days for nonprofits within the state of Minnesota. Right now, we've gone through fundraising all day, and I'm really excited to tell you the number that we are thus far. So right now, we're at $33,603.50, which is really, really great. But when we think about our larger goal, we're trying to get to 75K. So what does that mean? Your role in this, helping us get to that 75K through donations. But also, this broadcast goes beyond fiscal giving, because what we want to do today is provide you really great insight and content by the engagement that we're going to have today. Today, Carlson is leveraging some of our world-class faculty members who are really well respected around the world within specific research on specific topics. One of those topics that we will be discussing today. And that research and the topic that we're going to be discussing really will help edify and enlighten the audience and local businesses on specific areas. So structurally, what does this look like? Your role in this entire engagement will be to feed me questions. I'm going to then leverage those questions to pose to John, and John's going to edify this audience on each of those questions. So in your comment box on your screen, type in questions, shoot it to me. I'm watching the questions. I will pose them to John on demand. Make sense? Great. Well, speaking of distinguished panelists, I've had the pleasure of being in a classroom setting with our panelists. Professor John Kameyer Muller has done great work, great research within the area of HR. He's a faculty member in the Carlson School Center for Human Resources and Labor, and he is really excited to talk about today's topic. Now, today's topic is using HR data to tell a story about your staff. As most of you know, with the proliferation of digitalization, most HR systems are moving online right now. And HR managers are faced with hundreds of data points, both structured and unstructured, and really trying to figure out how do we garner the insights from that data to make better human resource management decisions around our workforce. So that is going to be at the core of what we're discussing today. As highlighted, throw questions in there, and I will be pushing them out. So really excited to start, John. And we have one question actually on the onset. So first question that's coming in is, what types of data should HR managers be collecting on their employees?
Okay, that's a really good question to start with. Thanks, Napoleon. I have noticed that a lot of organizations have been working really hard on using data that they have already in their employee databases to try to make decisions. And one of the biggest problems is trying to find out what the relevant data is to tell a story. When I talk to HR managers, that's the first thing that they all say is, we have the data, we know how to analyze it, we give it over to analytics, and there's not a really great interface there because they're not asking first, what kind of data do we need to drive those questions? So I think this is a really good place to start. I think the most important things that HR managers should be collecting as data relate to employee competencies, performance on the job, their relationships with other employees, and trying to pull all that together. So the basic things that would be in any HR information systems would be things like tenure. That's marginally useful. It's far more important to know what is it that people have been doing in their previous job tasks, and then figuring out what their future career trajectory is going to be. So it's all the stuff that would be generally in a succession plan. That's the data that really needs to be collected. It's the sort of information you can share with employees that helps them develop, but it's also the kind of data that organizations can use to figure out what are or are not important experiences, what kinds of data can they feed into an analytics program to figure out who is more or less likely to turn over, how does career progress, how is it facilitated by various kinds of developmental experiences. And that seems to be where the greatest need is, to tell a story about what makes a successful employee in an organization, what makes someone stay, and are there any experiences that might make someone leave. So it's specializing the data to the kind of questions you have, rather than just going with the data that's already sitting in a database. Is really starting from a question and then collecting the data that answers that.
Oh, that's really insightful, John. Are you seeing the data more structured or unstructured? Meaning, are you seeing more rows and columns data being leveraged? Or are you seeing them starting to get out into the social media world, the unstructured world of data that's available, the video content, et cetera, to make these decisions?
I think that within HR, there has been a tendency to just go straight off of spreadsheet data, right off of what's already in their human resources information systems. And I think that there is a real opportunity to use more unstructured data within a lot of the things like you mentioned with LinkedIn, even employee interview data. Some of that stuff is being transcribed, things that people put into job applications. We've been working recently with some school district data, and we've produced a paper together with Seema Sajadiani, who's one of our alumni, who's at the University of British Columbia, and Aaron Sojourner, who's also in my Department of Work and Organizations. And we were looking at job application data and then using machine learning to figure out themes that are coming from the things that people freely say in their job applications. And we came up with some themes that really we weren't able to find any other way. There's nothing else in their data set, but once we applied a machine learning algorithm, and it was nothing super complicated, it was a pretty straightforward process, and we learned all kinds of things that we hadn't known before about people's motivation for a job. So I think that that's the key, is really using unstructured data with machine learning to answer questions that you wouldn't think to ask otherwise.
Really insightful. So how much data do you need to paint a real, clear, concise picture about a staff member?
3 of data. No, just kidding. How much do you need? I think that if you're asking the right question and starting from that, it may not take that much data. I have found cases where you can make predictions with 5 or 6 data fields and intelligent use of machine learning paired together with the right questions. Again, it doesn't take that much to get a quick picture of somebody. The more you have in terms of competencies and goals, things like that, that is obviously important. But to start off with, it may not take as much as people think. It's just a question of asking the question first and then collecting data to that question.
Okay, that's great. So we have another audience question. The question is, what types of data indicate whether or not an employee is likely to turn over? That's really, really critical, right? How can we start understanding retention, et cetera?
So some of the things are what you would expect. Like straight away, if you have an employee satisfaction or engagement survey, keeping track of that. One thing that a lot of companies do is they don't link that back to the individual employee. And that is something that's, it's far more helpful to know about this individual as much as possible. Now, whether people are always honest in their self-report engagement surveys in an organization is kind of ambiguous, but that's something you should at least try to gather. But that's something I think everybody knows you want to gather. One thing that we found in research that may be a little less apparent is knowing about the critical events that are happening to people in the workplace. Things like finishing major projects, what kind of social networks people have with people outside of the organization and how those relationships are going. As people hit milestones in their career, like they have a 2-year development program, that's a point at which a lot of people start thinking about leaving the organization, and where you're going to want to come back and check with them and make sure that they're satisfied. If people are using social media, like you mentioned before, and you notice an uptick in their social media use, like their LinkedIn profile, they're getting more comments, that may be an indication that a job offer is coming in. It seems like those critical events really do mean a lot, and that's something that's available in a company's data set. So you want to look at all those transition events as closely as possible, and that'll tell you at least whether somebody's thinking about turning over. And what's fortunate is that can also tell you when managers can intervene. That tells you like not just who's likely to turn over, but when to do something to prevent turnover.
Okay, no, that's really insightful. So as we start thinking about privacy concerns and the whole realm of social media and leveraging data across platforms, is there any data that management should really avoid because of concerns from a privacy perspective?
First and foremost is obviously anything related to health. They have to steer as far away from any decisions that are related to employee health. It is possible
Mm.
sometimes for data to be available in a sidelong way about employee health, but that is just, it's a privacy issue and it can cause huge problems for organizations and employees. So that kind of information is something that should never be kept anywhere near data that you're using for making employment decisions. That's a huge concern. Health data is really, especially right now, as so many people have their health insurance and all their other benefits through the organization, and it is a potentially actionable area because there are potential for disability lawsuits and other kinds of discriminatory lawsuits around health data. It's really something to avoid. Um, Anything related to people's family or networks outside of work can also open an organization up to potential lawsuits and just general privacy things. So, like you mentioned, social media. When people are doing hiring processes, using social media can be a legal minefield as well. So, people really need to be careful in organizations about how much of that data they collect, and especially as they're collecting it, once it goes into somebody's profile and they're thinking of building the big data database and they have information in there that links to that, that's where you're really going to see big problems.
Excellent. So we have another question, and we started the conversation with insights driven. How can we capture insights? And this question hits that directly. What types of insights can you get about employees by leveraging the data that's available?
Okay, that's a great question, because I mentioned at the beginning thinking about the stories you can tell about people with data, and I think this question really gets into how do you ask a good question in the first place. I know that I mentioned in my classes, every single class I teach, I said people should read The Signal and the Noise by Nate Silver,
I
because
remember.
he talked a lot about yeah, he's probably said it like 6 times. But it's such a great book because he's worked so much with big data and he has come to the conclusion that the biggest problem is people aren't asking what they want to know. They're just asking what's in the data set and then flogging away at that. So the first thing that you need to know is, what is it that I want to know about employees? What types of insights do I plan on getting from that? I mentioned before things about employee goals and career trajectories that can tell you a lot about individual development plans, maybe people who are ready for succession within the organization. A lot of succession planning can be done. The groundwork for that can be laid from looking at data you already have from people's performance reviews. If you're doing performance evaluations and performance discussions with employees the right way, you can learn about a lot of that information. Another thing you could pull from that same data, so I know what your individual goals are. I can also take that data and put it into regression equations to figure out what kind of goals are associated with long-term performance. Are there types of motivations? Are there types of people who are going to be successful in the long run? And that's something else that that you can pull pretty directly from the data you already have, and that's really informative for the organization because it tells you how to assess people's goals, what those goals are going to look like over time, things like that.
Okay, that's excellent.
Yeah.
So we talked about the whole issue of privacy concerns and how navigating that would be critical in order to achieve the goals, objectives that we want. What are other challenges that you see from a data gathering, data analyzing perspective that could potentially inhibit or act as an obstacle in terms of organizations achieving their goals by leveraging data?
That is something I touched on really briefly with people's willingness to answer sensitive questions. That's a huge issue with a lot of data that's coming in related to workplace behavior. People are reluctant to say that they're frustrated with their work. People are reluctant to report that there's a problem with the supervisor because they're worried about retaliation. So developing an atmosphere of trust around how data is going to be used is a major issue, probably more for this area than any other in the organization. A lot of other data, marketing data, doesn't have that same problem. Operations data doesn't have that same problem. When you're talking about relationships with employees, building that atmosphere of trust. We will use this data only for good purposes. We will not ever reveal to your individual manager what this data is going to be for. So that having that climate of trust around data is crucial. And that's a concern that you really want to try to address through the data collection and analysis process. Yeah.
That's very insightful. Are you, John, seeing organizations that are successfully doing this right now? And if so, what does the curve look like? Where are most organizations on this? Do you see most organizations from an HR perspective leveraging data? Do you see most getting up that hill? What does it look like right now in the industry, in the field?
They're getting up that hill right now. I see when I've talked to some of the employers who hire at the U of M, so these are good organizations. These are companies that have the resources and leverage to, come into a major research university with a great MBA program and other great specialized master's programs. These are atypically strong organizations. They're still working on figuring out how to use data effectively. Some of these are organizations that have an enormous amount of data and some extremely skilled people working with data, and they're still asking questions. So I think that it's still very much in the initial stages, the very start of figuring out how to use data. If I was going to give students advice, which I do all the time, and they're interested in data analytics, I think learning how to use internal organizational data to facilitate employee performance is a great way to go. And I tell the students who are in the HR program, if you want to figure out how to build a successful career in a hurry, being ahead of the curve in knowing how to use analytics with the data you're already learning about and the concepts you're learning about in HR, that's a great way to go. So this is really an opportunity point right now for our students to be well ahead of the curve and getting into organizations and helping them navigate this space.
Okay, no, that's really insightful as well. Do you see, when I think about data and analytics within HR, I think about, okay, investment in systems, investment in technology. Do you see that as being an inhibitor for some organizations saying, we really can't get there yet because we really have to prioritize other things? Do you see deprioritization of HR systems that can be used to gather insights from data over other things? How are organizations looking at that?
Yeah. The strange thing is, I think it's mostly a competency issue. It's not expensive. A lot of organizations have a lot of this data already, and getting additional data is largely going to be driven by simple HR processes, performance evaluation, and employee development meetings. The data is already there. It's more just an issue of and it doesn't take that long to even get it into a spreadsheet. It's usually not that difficult to analyze the data relative to some of these other really extensive databases. HR databases are pretty easy to work with. It's more just the skills are not being applied to the area, which is another reason why I think it's an area for opportunity, because most organizations have data, they just don't have people who are able to put human resources together with data effectively.
Well, I heard a lot of opportunities that exist, and opportunities are positive. So organizations have opportunities to take advantage of this and drive growth, drive improvement from a performance perspective. John, I'm impressed to say that we're out of time. This conversation has been edifying, illuminating, and I hope you, the audience, took away from it some of the real key items that John highlighted. I know I have. So I want to thank you, John, for really being here today and providing insight on this topic. I want to thank you, audience, for also being here today and engaging with the questions that you put forward. They were really targeted questions that really helped us get to the root of what this issue is. So what I want to do is now provide you with an update from a fundraising perspective. But before I do that, I want to thank a couple of people. So we've had some individuals today who've done a great job donating thus far, and I want to just call them out and thank them. Alumni of the university, Gregory Mickelson, we'd love to thank you. Lori Peterson, love to thank you. And Michael Noble, love to thank you for all the work that you've done thus far. So for all of you who are watching, I want you to know you can still get in there, you can still donate right now. And for those who would like to make a gift or follow our progress, see the comment section below for a link to Carlson School crowdfunding page. But we would really appreciate and leverage that in the community, which is being done right now. So thank you, John. Thank you, everyone that's tuned in today. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.